And so it begins. The 19 co-defendants indicted by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis for their roles in a criminal enterprise to overturn the results of the presidential election in Georgia and beyond have begun to surrender. It is a brand new chapter in the legal effort to hold the accused liars, fraudsters, and criminal coup plotters accountable. Today, a flurry of activity at the Fulton County Jail. So far, we have seen 2 of the 19 defendants turn themselves in. The first was Scott Hall, a Georgia bail bondsman who was charged in the Coffee County election data breach. And the second, the poobah, the grand architect of the coup plot, Donald Trump's former lawyer, John Eastman. Today, a moment of reckoning for a key figure in the attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. But a potential criminal conviction seemingly not deterring Eastman from continuing to repeat the lies about the election that led to him being indicted in the first place. Outside the jailhouse, after Eastman had been processed, our colleague Ali Vitale asked him if he still believes the election was stolen. He said, quote, "Absolutely, no question in my mind." Eastman's surrender, proving that this warning from former White House lawyer Eric Hirschman was all too prescient.
Said, I only want to hear 2 words coming out of your mouth from now on. Orderly transition. Eventually he said, orderly transition. I said, good, John. Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it. And then I hung up on him.
Today's activity, of course, coming 2 days ahead of Donald Trump turning himself in. He posted on social media that he will travel to Atlanta Thursday to be arrested. Yesterday, the disgraced ex-president agreed to a $200,000 bond, and his consent order was notable for its specific stipulations, ones that were only found on Trump's order, namely that he is prohibited from intimidating any witnesses or co-defendants, including on social media. More surrenders in Fulton County look imminent. 2 men facing charges for the fake electors scheme, David Schaefer and Georgia State Senator Sean Still, have arranged their bond through consent orders with the DA's office. It is a major contrast to Trump's former chief of staff, who's now digging in further in his attempt to move his case to federal court. Just moments ago, he asked a federal judge to immediately grant his request or sign an order that would prevent DA Fani Willis from arresting him, since he will not be surrendering voluntarily by noon Friday. For her part, Fulton County DA Fani Willis fired back with a letter to Meadow's attorneys saying this, quote, "I am not granting any extensions. I gave 2 weeks for people to surrender themselves to the court. Your client is no different than any other criminal defendant in this jurisdiction. The 2 weeks were tremendous courtesy. At 12:30 p.m. Friday, I shall file warrants in the system." That is where we start today with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. From the New York Times, congressional reporter Luke Broadwater is back with us. Plus, outside the Rice Street Jail in Atlanta, senior reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Tamar Hallerman is back. And former acting U.S. Solicitor General and MSNBC legal analyst Neal Katyal is with us. Neal, I start with you. This is when the inner workings and what I'm sure lawyers and people inside the system think really is sort of the splendor of the system bursts into public view. And we see these processes that maybe we've seen in TV shows and movies yield their fruit. Things like mugshots are going to start coming out. Things like arrest warrants if you don't turn yourself in. I mean, this is where I guess the proverbial, you know what gets real.
Yeah, I mean, we're all as Americans, we know what the criminal justice system is, and it starts with an arrest and, in an indictment, and then there's a mugshot that's taken, there's fingerprints that are taken, there are bail conditions, bond agreements, and so on. That's what every criminal defendant has. Donald Trump, unfortunately, has gotten away, even in New York and under the federal indictments, with being treated specially. He didn't get fingerprinted. He didn't get the mugshot that every other criminal defendant does. And so I'm really glad to see Georgia saying, not in Georgia. We have no 2-tiered system of justice here. You're going to be treated just like every other criminal defendant. And we've seen that process unfold today with John Eastman and others going to the jail to have the booking and everything else that should happen. And, for Eastman to have it, so too should Trump. They were in it together.
Neal, what do you think is going on with Mark Meadows, and why not just go ahead and turn himself in? And if he succeeds in his efforts to move his case to federal court, there's nothing about being booked that makes that more difficult.
Yeah, I think Meadows has been someone who has been talking out of both sides of his mouth, and the New York Times has a new story about that right now. You know, he, in a way, seems like a perfect Trump henchman. He's like an invertebrate who, you know, doesn't have, you know, a commitment to principle or anything else. So, you know, so it's not surprising that he finds himself in this position. But I think that dance is unlikely to work in the future. He's so far avoided a federal indictment from Jack Smith, the special counsel. But I think patience is wearing thin. And Georgia has, of course, called him on it and said, nope, the stuff that you did, Mark Meadows, culminates in a criminal indictment. You committed crimes. And so Meadows has now filed two different pieces of paper, Nicolle, in Georgia court. One is to say this case belongs in federal court, not state court. And the other is to say he's absolutely immune from prosecution. Both are, you know, poppycock, to put it mildly. So the removal for him to move from state prosecution to a federal courthouse requires him to say that he's performing a federal function. And it's true that the president and the chief of staff to the president have broad powers under our Constitution. But the one place our founders said the line stops, the place where the president is cut out, is the Electoral College. For the most important of reasons, that's the place in which a sitting president has the most self-interest. He can self-deal. And so our founders, you know, cut them out of that. So Meadows and Trump were not performing a federal function. They certainly weren't trying to safeguard the integrity of the election process, like the cockamamie things they say. Of course not. They were just they were in it for themselves, trying to launch a coup. And then on this other idea that Meadows is absolutely immune, when Trump has been tweeting this as well, I can't think of anything more ridiculous. You know, first of all, Haldeman, like back in the Nixon administration, Nixon's chief of staff went to prison for Watergate. He didn't get some absolute immunity or anything like that. And if this argument were true, Nicolle, it would mean that Biden and his current chief of staff, Jeff Zients, could just install Biden as the next president in 2024 and throw out the popular vote. That can't possibly be how the law works. Our Constitution's never worked that way. These are bogus arguments through and through, and, you know, they'll be rejected in due course.
It is amazing, though, that they find lawyers to make those arguments for them. Luke Broadwater, Neal mentioned this really well-written, sort of tight analysis of the state of Mark Meadows as a witness who does not appear to be a named target in the federal investigations, but is, of course, indicted for his role in a criminal enterprise in Georgia. I want to take us through what you and your colleagues are reporting.
Sure. Well, Mark Meadows, as he has done for some time, attempted to walk a fine line with these indictments or with these multiple investigations. Ultimately, as your viewers know, he gets charged in Georgia, but not with the Justice Department. One deciding factor, perhaps, in that is he was much more cooperative with the Justice Department, according to our reporting. He submitted to 2 interviews before the grand jury. The second one, we're told, he was much more forthcoming than in the first interview with the grand jury. That's in part because a judge ordered him to do so after denying some of his privilege invocations. We know, for instance, that he told the grand jury information both about the documents case and about January 6th. And you can see some signs in the federal indictment that Meadows is cast in a less negative light than in the Georgia indictment. In the federal indictment, there's, I would say, both positive and negative information about Mark Meadows in there. It recounts a scene at Cobb County where he appears to do the right thing and tell Donald Trump that the elections officials are doing a good job. It mentions how on January 6th, he asked Trump to order the rioters to leave the Capitol. But it also includes an email in which he helped coordinate the false electors scheme. The Georgia indictment is much more damning about Mark Meadows and really portrays him as a henchman to Donald Trump, carrying out Donald Trump's bidding in multiple facets of the plan to overturn the election. And so you can see this sort of high wire tightrope walking, which was how we described it in the story, and how it appears so far to have worked for him with the feds, but not so much in Georgia.
I mean, Luke, again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm reminded of those hotel commercials, right? I just stated whatever the chain is. But what seems, again, and we don't know what's going on in private, but what might be part of his legal strategy is that his attorney has sort of kept him talking. He's kept some sort of channel open, and it seems that he, whether he did or did not cooperate fully the first time, or whether he did or did not answer the questions they were looking to have answered on 1/6, it seems like he talked about the documents investigation in a way that ABC News suggests might have been helpful in either corroborating or filling in some blanks. I mean, do we have any sense if the disposition of Mark Meadows' legal exposure is at the beginning, the middle, or the end?
So I would think that the federal case is still very much alive, as we know, Jack Smith has a pattern of bringing superseding indictments, and we know that case is ongoing. And so I would suggest, I would guess he's not out of the clear just yet in any case. But I do think he made an effort, at least with the federal prosecutors, to give them enough information to try to act as neither a pro-Trump witness nor an anti-Trump witness. That was his strategy going in, to not be very negative about Trump, but also not to be defending Trump. And so, we know from ABC News, and we've confirmed this, that he did tell them that Trump had not given an order to declassify, a broad declassification order, which, many people at the White House have said, but we know that he said that directly to the grand jury.
Neal, I just want to pull you in on this for your legal analysis. And of course, you and I talked about it at the time, that the idea that there was any standing declassification, I mean, it's like oxymoronic, key on sort of moronic, that just would never work. It's not how an intelligence product works, that any document that travels from one building to the other on the 18-acre complex would automatically be declassified. It would involve calling the intelligence agencies, calling American allies, calling the NSA and the CIA every night to tell them what he took with him. And it was nonsensical. But to now have it completely confirmed in black and white that there never was any such thing as a standing declassification order seems like a pretty devastating legal fact from a pretty authoritative witness against Trump in Mark Meadows.
100%, Nicolle. So this has been Trump's defense ever since the raid on Mar-a-Lago. He's always said, I had a standing order to declassify documents when I took them out of the Oval Office, which is thoroughly preposterous on every level. For one thing, it would mean that like all of the nation's most sensitive secrets, the moment they left the Oval Office, were declassified, covert operations and things like that. The intelligence community would have had an uproar if that were the way in which these documents were being treated. Also problematic is the fact that Donald Trump, when he wanted to declassify in the Russia investigation to harm his political opponents, he went through a certain process to do it. He didn't say, take them out of the Oval Office and say they're magically declassified. So it's not surprising that Mark Meadows is saying now there was no standing order to declassify. I mean, it's like finding out, as I said to Andrew Weissman the other day, it's like finding out that there's sugar in dessert. Of course, everyone knows that. There's no standing order to declassify the documents. What I think the Meadows thing does, though, Nicolle, is it says the prosecutors now have someone highly credible, the president's former chief of staff, saying, Donald Trump, your main defense is not true. And that, to me, increases the criminal exposure of Donald Trump for the stolen documents at Mar-a-Lago.